Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we are gonna talk about context in a software and games localization. Now, why is this important? When we are translating texts related to software and games, we often deal with marketing material, text that would appear on forums, on help, but also we are translating user interface. And there we can see dialogues, we can see tooltips, but we can also see text that would appear on buttons. And that one can be sometimes a bit tricky because we sometimes don't really know what the text is until we actually see it in the game. Now, we do not have the privilege often to see the text appearing in games, but nevertheless, we can still sometimes in the document itself figure out where the text will be used. Now, to give you a simple example why context really matters, I'll show you here this document, properties files, and if we open it, we can see here two strings, open and open. Now, how would you translate this? How would you know where this text appears, where it belongs, and how you will translate it? Pretty tricky, right? And if you're using machine translation, we see here it will not help us. It in both cases just translates the text. Of course, doesn't know, the engine doesn't know where we should put it. So if we are importing a document like this, we will be mostly guessing the translation, and that's definitely not what we want to do. So instead, we can look as detectives on clues where the text should appear. Now, the last resort is always that you ask the client, and they will probably send you some screenshots or something. But if you are translating a lot of content, that is not that ideal and sometimes not doable, so we have to help ourselves out here. And the first thing that you can actually do is to check the document in something else than MemoQ first. So here we have the document, and we'll open it in Sublime. You can open it in Notepad, any kind of editor. And here we can actually see what we are about to translate. Here we see the two strings that will appear in MemoQ, open and open. But then we have this orange part in this case, which is the key. And this is actually the key also to our translation, because here we see how we should actually translate the text. Open the door, and the door is open. So this gives us clues how to then translate this, for instance, in German or in other languages. Now, when I was importing the document, I also cheated a little bit because I didn't want to give you any clues. The good thing is that if you will import properties files or any other similar files, MemoQ will there help you already, and it will import the context as we have seen it in Notepad. Now, if you try to import a document, now I will remove this one and import it with the standard settings, properties. You'll be able to see here this little area which will show you the context, and here it says open the door, and here the door is open. So in German it would be öffnen, and here geöffnet. So this gives us clues, and this can also be, if you don't change anything, this context will also be displayed in the comment section. So if you switch here to active comments, you will see that the context is also displayed here. Now, while you have this context in MemoQ, it's also good that you store it into the translation memory. So the next time when you import a document similar to this with strings without any, let's say, context in the sense of flow of the text, you can still use it. And how do you do that? How do you store this context? Now, by default, if you don't do anything, this will not be stored, because MemoQ will store the sentence that you are translating by default and the order of three, or the sequence of three sentences. So the sentence before, sentence after, and the sentence that you are translating. So this will be then treated as a context. If you want to see this context in addition in your translation memory, then you will have to create a translation memory that will store actually what we call double context. So we click on translation memories, and here we create a new translation memory. We give it any meaningful name, and then we switch here to double context. Now, in case you're wondering, no context means that you're only storing the sentence without any context, and this is really not useful for software. It will make the translation memory smaller or lighter, but for software localization where context really matters, double context is the way to go. Click on OK, and now we can go over here and translate this. So open the door, öffnen. So like that, and like that, and then confirm. Now here we already get a suggestion, which is context match, but we will not use it instead, because here that's not enough. 101 is not enough in this case. We have to write öffnet. Something like that. Okay. And now if you store this, you will see that you will have here 102% match. And you will also have here 101% match. That one is from the previous sentence, which has a different context. So different sequence of three sentences. So, or in this case, the beginning of the document and the second sentence, and a different context in sense of this key. If we switch to this one, we'll have again a 102% match, this time öffnen, and we'll get 101% match, which is then the second one. So MemoQ will be able to distinguish and provide you the best translation, even if the source is the same, but the context is different. So this is the logic behind double context, and now we'll see in some other examples where you can actually find context. And in case MemoQ will not import it by default, I'll show you a couple of ways how you can then import it manually. So this is properties files. Now we can also go ahead and import one properties files with the filter. So I'll show you what you have to enable or disable in case that's for some reason disabled. So you click on change filter and configuration, and here you will see import property name as context ID. That's something that you have to import. That's something you have to select. You can also store it in comment, but that's not crucial. This is the most important thing that you need here. So click on OK, OK. And now if we open the document, we'll see again here we have two similar strings. We don't know where they appear, but if we look into the context section, we see that the context will maybe give us hints how to translate these strings. Then there are actually a couple of document types that have a similar logic. So we have some sort of a key at the beginning, and then we have a delimiter, and then we have the string for translation. So for instance, JSON is also one such format. Even though this one is a bit more complex, you can have more simplified ones. The point is that we would have here this part, which is context, and this is the text for translation. This is then the context, so ID, and this, or let's say a key, this is then the value for translation. And here, same thing. So key value, key value, key value. Now the interesting thing about this particular type of JSON, by the way, you can have simplified ones where you wouldn't have this stacked tree of context. But the good thing is that if you have such a tree of context, you can actually stack that together and concatenate that, and then really get unique contexts. So you would have, for instance, with this one, you could have, or let's say here, you could have glossary dot title as context, and then you would translate this string. I'll show you how that can be done. So if we close that part, we import this JSON, change filter and configuration, and here we'll see immediately a tab called context, and here you can skip the context part, although I will not do that. But if you want to concatenate the keys, you can also do that with this option, and then you can go further, and you can then define what you will do with any of those parts. This is actually similar to XML filter, but what you have to do is, if you want to get the map of the file, you first have to add it here. So click on JSON, and then you populate the structure, and then you can here say what you want to do with that, if some keys should be translatable or not, and if you want to treat them as comments or context. You can then also here display a flat view or a structured view. So this is pretty specific for specific types of JSONs. Like JSONs, as I said, can be really simplified. And once you figure that out, you can also, of course, save this filter and use it for later. You can also then use cascading filters if you want to lock some additional parts, like variables maybe. Click on OK, OK, and this will be now our JSON file, where we can see here is the value. And we see now the context is actually consisting, because we have concatenated it, consists of 2 keys. So this is then really unique. Now this is really the point of this context, so that we get something unique, that we get this unique value, so that there are no 2 the same. And usually that's the case. I mean, that's the point. That's the point of providing a context, so that when we import this translated content back to the software, that the software knows where to put the translations, and based on those keys it does know. So it's very important that we don't change them. So as said, for the first one, we have here sample example glossary, and the context is consisting of glossary and title. Then we can translate it as the usual documents. So here we could also see some so JSON is a very common format. We could also see some regex files, similar logic, or some custom files. They will all have the similar logic. Now we can also find context in XML files. Not all XML files do contain context, but if you open it, you may look for it and define it, because it can help you. So in this case, we see that the text that is white will be translated by default, and we have some strings that do contain those IDs. Now the context can be actually named in any way you wish, but you would usually look for something that contains any ID, or some text that is unique and maybe separated, or yeah, let's say separated with dots or any underscores, or is written with small and upper caps. So something that is unique. We are looking for unique meta information, and here we got that. And how do we then define this so that we store it in the translation memory. In this case, we would go into import with options, select the XML file, change filter and configuration, and here we would in this case go to tags and attributes, and here we would then, to get the structure of the XML, click on populate, and then we would get the list of all the tags. So tags are in this case all the green elements, and what we need to find is the green elements that contain this ID. So in this case we have main, title and header. So we here look for main, there we got it, and this thing here is actually an attribute. This is the value of the attribute. So we find we could have several attributes in one tag. So here we only have one, this ID, this purple one. So if we look into MemoQ filter configuration, we see here this main tag, and then we have below the attribute, which is ID. And here we can say also if we want to translate it, we could, but in this case we will import it as context. Now here we can define to which elements in this tag it applies. So you see this terminology, we are talking about children, siblings, and basically parents. So what this refers to is children are all the elements in this tag. We could have also several sentences, let's say, in this, or sub tags in this tag. So when they would if they are on the same level, they would be called siblings, and if they are on the level below, they would be called children. If they are on the level higher, we would call them parents. So for instance, main tag is a child of a sample, and sample is parent of main. But the main and title, they are siblings. So family tree, just in software terminology. So in this case, we are talking about text children, and click on OK. And we then find also the title here. Same, it's context for children. And we have here header, which we also then define, where we define ID as context for children. Again, we could save this, so we don't have to do this over and over. Click on OK, OK. And now if you open this XML file, we will see that for the first four, we have in the corner the context. Here it's again here. But then if we continue, there is no context because the tag doesn't have any attributes. So another very common example, or another example, or a more complex one, can be multilingual XML. Now if we open this one, we see that we have a bit of an interesting structure, but that's actually not that difficult to figure out once you have seen it twice or three times. Now what we are looking for, as said, with context, is some sort of a unique identifier. Now if we take a closer look, we said green ones are tags. We will need to define which are the ones that we will translate. The purple ones are the attributes, and here we need to find a specific unique identifier that will be our context. And now if we check what is available, we see here name, and now we see if that one actually is unique. So we see solution prop sep, and here it's the same, so this will not help us. Search keywords, is this unique? Not really. Selection break, nope. Keyword, nope. Text, nope. Solution prep, maybe. We could use that one because see 0, 1, 2, that one could be used, or we could use this one. So it's actually the same ID, but it's on a different level. So that's something that yeah, we will talk in the next second. But yeah, we could define actually in this case either of them. So we'll here take this one, but we could technically also use that one as well. Okay, so how do we deal with that kind of monstrosity? We go to MemoQ and then we import the file with options, and then we say multilingual XML. Change filter and configuration. Now we will change here the filter because the standard XML will not help us. So we define multilingual XML filter, and we go in this case to import rules. And here we say edit import rules. Now let me clarify how to operate with this kind of filter and configuration if you're new to it. On the left side we see here this structure. And here we have to click on the arrows until we reach the content that we are translating. And the content can be found, in this case, in those tags: English, Chinese, Spanish, German. What's very important is that you will see that we have here nodes, I'd say, and they always, so this order needs to always be the same. If the order changes, then we would have to apply a script that would reorder this so that the sequence would be always the same. So you can see here English, Chinese, Spanish, German repeats in all the 3 nodes. Very important. Otherwise the filter will not be working. I mean, the filter will be working consistently, but the content will not be placed where you would expect it. So how do we define what should be translated into English and German and so on, and what is context? To define which is the English part, we click over here, dynamic content. Actually, you just click on this purple part, and then you will see here this XPath row. And what you do with this is you copy it over here by clicking fill from selected to row, and then you apply the language, which is in this case English. And then one important thing, what we see here is actually a sequence that repeats itself. And now what you have to do is you have to tell which tag repeats itself and which is kind of fixed. Now, as you can see, we have here a root tag, which is only 1. And we have here dynamic element, which are actually 3 of them. And we also have here 30 of them. And here we have 4 of them. Now, how does this thing work? If you check here in this line, you will see here root, and then there is number 1. Dynamic element number 1. And here dynamic element 1, dynamic element number 1. If you leave it like that, MemoQ will only import the first root, the first dynamic element, the first dynamic element, and the first dynamic element. So this one, and this one, nothing else. So it will not go into the next sequence. So how do you tell MemoQ to go into the next sequence? You would leave this root because it's only 1, but the dynamic elements change. And we don't know how many of them are. I mean, if we know, here we see there are 3, but you could have a longer document. And you could say, if you don't know, you put here a little star. And then the same thing here. But here not. I'll try to guess why. Because if we do it here, then MemoQ will always treat English for all the occurrences here. Now here actually we just want the first one to be imported as English. So just make 2 stars in the middle ones. And then how to define the context? We go over here, and we will see here this context. So we will use it. Click on click on search keywords. And then you will see that the XPath changed. And now we place ourselves in the context and click on fill from selected row. And then we use the same thing. We do the same configuration. So we say context will be, well, it occurs in 1 root because it's only 1. But then this one will, it's not just 1 dynamic element that we'll use the context in. And it will not be only 1 dynamic element here. It does not appear in the last dynamic content as you can see. So it only appears in the second and the third one, but we will use the third one. So once you're done with that, you click on Save to Rule Set, and now we need to also define the German one. And to do that quickly, what we need to do is everything stays the same, just that here this dynamic content is not the first one, but it's the fourth one. So we select the language, which is German. And here we say dynamic content, instead of 1, it's number 4. And then we save this to the rule set. And now we got our content. You will also see that it's highlighted. If it's blue, it means that it will be imported. If it's orange, it's context. And comment is green. And this yellowish thing is length. So click on OK. Of course, you would want to save this so that you don't have to do this over and over. Click on OK. OK. And then we have our little document and the content that will be properly processed with the context that we have defined. So this one is pretty interesting. Now, one other very common case is a multilingual Excel file. Now, there are a couple of flavors of Excel that you can find around. But usually the structure is the following. You would have a couple of language columns. You may have a comment column or any kind of meta information. You could also in software localization see the column with length limitations. And you can have one or more columns where there are some sort of IDs. Now your goal is just to pick one that is really unique. And if there are more ID columns, this probably means that this same Excel is used by several tools, because probably each tool has its own ID list, and based on that it knows where to put the content and how to export it. So just be consistent and always use the same context tab, context column, and you can also have the content spread over several spreadsheets. In that case, you can also use the filtered and memo queue to process the files nicely. How to do that? Show you quickly. Import with options again. Sample multilingual Excel. Change filter and configuration. We switch the filter to the longest that you can find around, which is multilingual, or almost the longest one. In German, it's definitely the longest. So multilingual delimited text filter will allow us to actually specify which column should be imported for which language. One note I would make here, not related to context, but segment source text if possible, so that you would get shorter sentences, or sentences basically, because that way MemoQ will give you better matches. But what's important is that you go to the columns, and here you define the structure. First row in our case contains column names. If we open it, we'll be able to see how that one is structured. So go over here. First row headers, we want to skip that. We do that by clicking this option. Source is English. Existing content, should we import it or not? It's here where you define it. We can confirm it as it was confirmed by the translator. And then we go to the structure. This is very important. We say here B is source, C is German. So we do B is a source text, C is a translation for column B, which will be translated into German. We'll skip D because we don't have French in this project. Length limitation is E. So we say length limitation. It's important that you only have characters there. If you have length limitation, you can define to which source columns it applies. We'll say all. I mean, we have only one, so we'll do that. And this one is a comment. Again, applying to all the source texts. And now we have here the column A, which is in our case context. So and that's really it. Save this. You don't want to do this over and over. If you have content over, if you have content on other spreadsheets, just click on this little arrow pointing up, and then you can also copy the structure from the previous ones, which is pretty cool. So you don't have to do this over and over again. Save this and click on OK. I'll close this Excel, not to confuse MemoQ. Click on OK. And now we got our Excel. Import it nicely. Just translate everything and export it. MemoQ will know where to put the content. And you can see here, this is the context again displayed nicely for us. Now, last but not least, let's get a bit more creative. Sometimes, as the clients are, sometimes the clients have their own files. And in this case, we have here such a file. As you can see, we have here text for translation, brackets. Logic or structure similar. We have here the key, just that it's slightly differently structured. It has those quotation marks, equal sign in the middle, spaces. Now, what we could use for context, we could use either this part or theoretically also this one. So you see on top, we always have here different line. So be sure that you pick the one that is more, let's say, unique. So, or maybe you can also treat this one as context and this one as comment, if it would add any value. I'll today just show you how you can import this one as context. But if you would be interested in knowing more how to process similar texts so that you would import this one as comment, that can also be done. Just get back to us and we'll help you there. We have a lot of experience with such or even more complex files. Okay, how to process this one? We go into import with options. Now, as you can see, this one is not even recognized, so we have to put a little star that we display this file that has an unconventional ending for MemoQ. You will also see that it's not recognized, unknown filter, but that will definitely not stop us. So we click on change filter and configuration. And then we select here, in this case, regex text filter. And now this one is based on regular expressions. If you would like to learn more about regular expressions, we offer a pretty comprehensive course for the beginners. And you can really learn the basics of regex. If you would need to know more, like some advanced stuff related to regex, because it can be really creative, also get back to us and we'll help you here. But the good thing is that we also have an embedded regex assistant, which can help you play around with regular expressions. Now, how does this regex text filter work? First, what we need to do is we need to tell MemoQ what is a segment. And here you can see actually paragraph. No? What is a paragraph? What will be a segment? And you can say it's a new line, empty line, line with spaces, or you can actually have your own rule. And once you select this one, you check the preview, and here you will see how it was segmented. Every line represents a segment. So in this case, we are aiming for segments that will only contain, let's say, one of the strings that we want to translate. In this case, our goal would be that that those lines are in separate segments, and works nicely. We could also put them together so that, for instance, two would be together, and here we would then apply the comment to this string and the context. So we'll not go into this detail. To us, it's just important that we have this in one line. And now what we will do, we'll copy one line, and then we will go to the paragraph. So this is where we define which part in this line actually is content for translation, and which is, in this case, all the unnecessary things, or let's say meta information that we can then eventually use as context, comment, or ignore it. So we will actually use it as context. So what do? We go to the paragraph, and what I like to do, if it's not something extremely complicated, I just paste the whole line and then replace the parts with regular expressions. Now, if you are new to regular expressions, this will be, maybe a bit too much. So there are easier ways how to get started with regular expressions. But what regular expressions help you to do is basically define patterns so that you don't have to, for instance, always type number of days and all the variants of what can occur here. But you would, for instance, only say, I don't care what it is, as long as it's one character, which is here defined by a dot. And this should repeat unlimited number of times, which is a plus. And then we stop looking at the first occurrence of this bracket. So this is the expression. And then we look for a space, we look for an equal sign, space, bracket, and then we have again this text for translation, which I don't really care what it is, just as long as there is some sort of a character that repeats itself unlimited number of times, starting with 1. But minimum with 1, and stops with the first occurrence of this bracket. That's why the question mark is. Now, you see we have here a red line. If the line here is red, this means that the expression is missing something. Either is wrong or is missing the group. Now, this part, this section works like this. You have to here in this rule define which part is the group that will be used for translation and which part is a group that will be used for context in this case. And how do we define groups? We basically say here, between those brackets, that's a group that will be translatable. So we put here brackets, opening bracket and closing bracket. Earlier I was saying that those are brackets. I meant quotation marks, of course. So and here we have another group that will be used for context. So we always have to put them in brackets. So like that. Now we see that the line turned white, which means that it's good. And we end the line with the semicolon. So it's very important that you define the whole line. The whole line needs to be defined. So what do we do then? We click on add, and then we say which of those two groups is content for translation and which of those groups is content for context. So we say here group for content is below here is number 2, so the second one, and the group for context is number 1. We have to here type a $sign and 1. There's some room for improvement on this UI to make it a bit consistent, but nevertheless, here we have the same thing. Just click on add. So content group number 2, context group number 1, and then you can check in the preview if your expression is fine. And what you're looking for is that the text for translation should be green, which is, and if you're looking to add context, then it should be italic, it should be written in italics, and comment would be then also here displayed in bold. Now, if we would go a step further, since we are already talking about regular expressions, you can see we have here a variable, and that's also something that you can lock by adding a cascading filter, so over here, and then applying the regular expression rule so that you would lock this part as well in addition. So you can get a really sophisticated and a properly working filter that you can then reuse, put it in a template, and you just drop files, strings, as you would do with the usual files, and get them processed quite nicely. So if we open this file, we now see the text for translation is only there, no other parts, and we got ourselves a context imported. So I hope that you find that you found this session inspiring, and I hope that it may also help you solve some of the challenges in localizing software and games texts. And if you have any questions, feel free to get back to us, and we'll try to assist you as good as we can. As I said, we have a lot of experience with interesting file formats, so yeah, this is always like an interesting challenge, and yeah, hope that this will help you find some solutions, or get some inspiration, give you some inspiration to tackle the challenges that you may be facing. Thank you very much, and till next time, take care. Ciao.